In this third lecture, I'm going to take you through the specific language skills that are necessary to help you avoid plagiarism in writing, as well as in your oral presentation that you might have for your class, especially if you are using the words and ideas of other sources in your own work. Specifically, I'll be talking about how and when to use quotations, paraphrases, summaries, and different types of citations, and a little bit about bibliographies. One point that I want to emphasize, though, at the outset of this lecture is that many times how you quote, paraphrase, summarize, and cite original sources, that is, how you use punctuation, capitalization, parentheses, and what we're going to call reporting phrases, how you do all of these things depends on the conventions and writing style guides within your specific discipline or field of study. For example, within the humanities disciplines, for example, English studies, language and literature, literary criticism, cultural studies, students and scholars use MLA style for documentation of sources. MLA stands for the Modern Language Association, and when you cite sources in this style of documentation, you use what's called author page style. That is, you cite the author's name and the page number on which the citation occurred in the original. Now, why is this? Why are we concerned about author page in these disciplines? Well, the reason is because in the humanities in general, English studies, literary criticism, cultural studies, etc., the discipline is less concerned about the dates or the years when something was written, like a Shakespearean play or a British novel. Scholars are more concerned less with the year it was published and more with the literary themes or symbols that are universal and somewhat timeless. In the social sciences, such as psychology, linguistics, sociology, economics, criminology, education, sometimes business and nursing as well, APA style is frequently used, and APA refers to the American Psychological Association. Here, instead of author page, author year is used. And the reason is because in these disciplines, we are concerned with when certain studies or experiments, like psychological experiments or business studies, were conducted, so that scholars can evaluate how up-to-date these studies are and how they build on previous scholarly work to advance theories in the disciplines. And finally, there is something called the Chicago style for these same disciplines: psychology, linguistics, sociology, economics, and criminology, journalism even, and sometimes even some other fields. Chicago style is the footnote-endnote system where you put a number 1 superscript at the end of a sentence, and that number refers to a citation in the bibliography, so your bibliography is numbered. I won't talk a lot about Chicago style in this lecture because most commonly used are MLA style and APA style or some variation on them, and particularly because they're most useful for undergraduates as well. But needless to say, there are many different styles other than these three, MLA, APA, and Chicago, for different fields of study. For example, different fields of engineering have their own documentation styles, as well as statistics and mathematics. Common knowledge refers to information that is commonly held to be true in your specific discipline, and it doesn't need to be cited or quoted or attributed in any other way to a specific person or source. In general, common knowledge refers to information that the average educated reader would accept as reliable without having to look it up. It also refers to information that most people know, such as the water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, or that Barack Obama was the first president of American of mixed race to be elected president. Information shared by a cultural or national group, such as the names of famous heroes or even events in the nation's history that are remembered and celebrated. Knowledge shared by members of a certain field of study, such as the fact that the necessary condition for diffraction of radiation of wavelength from a crystalline solid is given by Bragg's law. Again, this is very discipline specific. I don't know what Bragg's law is because I don't even know what diffraction is because I'm not in this field of study and I don't have that shared knowledge about radiation. So if I'm part of the audience, then I would need that cited. But if I'm not, if everybody knows this in your discipline, this is where it gets difficult to determine. When in doubt, my suggestion is to always cite and or ask your professor or the writing center. So let's look at some examples now. Pause this video lecture and look at the following 4 examples and try to determine, is this sentence part of common knowledge in general or not? If so, then should it be cited or not? Or does it depend on the discipline? So now I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the academic skills that are necessary in order to avoid plagiarism in your writing and in your presentations. Specifically, I want to talk about quoting, paraphrasing, summarizing, and citing. What do these terms mean? How do you do them, and how do they differ from each other? So a quotation is the exact word-for-word copy of an original text with the use of quotation marks in your own essay. The key here is that it is an exact word-for-word copy, regardless of whether you are using the exact word or words, phrases, sentences, or whole longer passages from an original text. Now, students often want to know, when do I use a quotation, and how much of a quotation should I use? Well, in general, you would use a quotation from an original text when the specific word or words, phrases, sentences, or whole passages are particularly original or new in your discipline, creative or poetic, or they express concisely a tone or attitude on the part of the author or a point that you are trying to highlight. In this sense, don't try to get everything in the quote, but try to isolate what is particularly characteristic and original about these words that the author is using, and how does it relate to whatever point you are making. The example sentence that I have here says, in the article, Where I Lived and What I Lived For, Thoreau states directly his purpose for going into the woods when he says, quote, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to confront only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. 252. Now, what's going on here in terms of quotation? Well, first you see I bolded and underlined what's called the reporting phrase or reporting phrases. In the beginning, this is one strategy, where you're introducing. It's always important to introduce a quote. Who said it? Who wrote it? Where did it come from what publication? This often is at the beginning of the sentence, but it can also occur at the end of the sentence where you see the page number 252. You're also going to want to use reporting verbs to introduce the quotation. Here's an example of a reporting verb phrase. When he says, I've highlighted and bolded it in this sentence. There are many reporting verbs in English depending on what you mean and how you feel about what the author has said or written. Now, a paraphrase is a much more difficult skill, I think, than quoting, because paraphrasing means you have to translate one or two sentences from the original into your own words by using things like synonyms and antonyms. Synonyms means words that mean the same thing. Antonyms means words that mean the opposite. But not just synonyms and antonyms. You also paraphrase by changing word forms, changing the word responsible to responsibility, or the word diagnose to diagnostic. In this way, you're keeping the same meaning, but changing the part of speech, if you will, and the word endings or word forms in order to paraphrase, put in your own words. By doing that, inevitably, you will have to change the grammar or the order of words. So if I say, for example, students must have responsibility, I might, instead of use the word responsibility, use the word responsible. I might say, students must be responsible. The grammar slightly changes. Or I might say, even change the whole word order, I might say, being responsible is important for students. So now let's take a look at a paraphrase sentence and look at what strategies were used if we compare it and contrast it with the original sentence from the original author. Here I have a paraphrase analysis, what strategies I used. The original sentence says, since advanced language proficiency is required in order to paraphrase, numerous people for whom English is a non-native language encounter extreme difficulty. But if we look at what is being paraphrased and how, we can see some of the changes that were made. For example, in the original, it says to paraphrase, which was changed to paraphrasing, as you see in the first column to the second column in the table. This is a change in word forms. Is required in the passive voice is changed to the active voice requires, and extreme difficulty is changed to extremely difficult. Also in the paraphrase, synonyms are used. Since is changed to because. Advanced language proficiency is changed to a high level of linguistic proficiency. Other strategies like synonyms and changing the word order, grammar, or syntax is used here as well. Numerous is changed to many. People for whom English is a non-native language is changed to for many non-native speakers of English. You see a bit of changing of word order there. And is an extremely difficult skill is changed to encounter extreme difficulty. So in this sense, some synonyms like numerous and many are used, but this necessitates some moving around of word order. Now, when do you paraphrase? Well, you paraphrase when the idea from the original author, not his or her exact words necessarily, is the focus of your point in your writing or in your presentation, because the idea is original or new, not particularly the words. We can see that paraphrasing differs from quotation in terms of, again, punctuation and capitalization. For example, I start with the reporting phrase, Willette 2014 found that. I'm using the word that instead of a comma. Instead of, in the quotation, he says, comma, I'm using Willette found that, no comma. And then I'm not using a capital letter or quotation marks. I'm using a lowercase letter for paraphrasing and continuing with my own words. Now I want to talk a little bit about summarizing and how it differs from paraphrasing. A summary is an overall translation of the main point or main idea or ideas of a whole text or extended passage in your own words without specific examples or details from the original. So, like a paraphrase, it's a translation into your own words. However, unlike a paraphrase, a summary is a translation of only the main point or main ideas and possibly important information in the original, not every specific detail. So I know this particular lecture was long. It had a lot of detailed, very meticulous information about how to quote, paraphrase, summarize, and use bibliographies, and it definitely wasn't complete. It also may have been kind of confusing at times with the difference between APA and MLA styles. But I hope you did a little bit of practice on your own, and I hope you began to investigate further online and possibly soon will attend a writing center session or tutoring session or come to a workshop, because it's really important as part of an academic community to follow certain guidelines that your audience will expect.